The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. This is the Bill Martinez Show as we give you an update on Israel at war with Hamas. Is Hezbollah next? Join us as we update the current situation in Israel with three critical perspectives from the military, social, and cultural angle, as well as political and the potential regional impact that this could have. We have three guests today that include Gregg Roman, who previously served as the political advisor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, worked for the Israel Ministry of Defense, Dr. Susan Michaels, who for more than 35 years has pioneered the development of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, in the United States and around the world, and Dexter Van Zile, who is the managing editor of the Middle East Forum publication focused on Western Islamism. Prior to his current position, Dexter worked at the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis for over 15 years, where he played a major role in countering misinformation broadcast into Christian churches by Palestinian Christians and refuting antisemitic propaganda broadcast by white nationalists and their allies in the U.S. Dexter, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, I appreciate the time here because here you are. You, for many years, managed misinformation. And today, in this information age, it is really, in many ways, kind of the Wild West all over again. Between AI bots and other foreign interest, you need to be careful. I say you, I'm talking about the collective you, the corporate you of us, need to be careful in terms of the information that we're getting, that we get the whole truth and nothing but. And Dexter, I will tell you, one of the things that we stress on our show with the audience is that you must own your own knowledge. Yes, we're here. Hopefully it blesses you. It enlarges your intelligence on what's happening there in Israel or around the world. But that don't just take our word for it, because this is the trap that we've fallen into, I would say, in the last decade, is that we're being told what we should believe and that we should dispense of any kind of critical thinking or follow-up questions, right?
Right. And that's a very troublesome thing. And the problem is that in many instances, people are generally been trained over many decades to think ill of Israel as a result of a lot of the propaganda that's been spread on college campuses, and also, frankly, by some of the churches as well. And that was essentially my job for 16 or so years, and to counter that misinformation. But the narrative, the amazing thing is that ultimately the narrative that was broadcast time and time and time again problematized Jewish and Israeli self-defense. Right. And basically gave license to Palestinian violence. And the thing is that the horrors of the attack that took place on Saturday have stopped that process a little bit, but it's now already starting to kick in, and it's simply amazing.
Well, it's hard to refute because, like you said, what we're dealing with is thousands of years of narrative and propaganda. Generations in the madrasa, in these Arab madrasas, where these young kids have been indoctrinated. And it's interesting because we can see some parallel. Hopefully, people are starting to see the parallel that's occurring here in the United States. The indoctrination. I mean, that document that was signed by the student groups in Stanford, for example, supporting Hamas. And you're thinking, wait a minute, how can this be at Stanford University, one of the elite colleges in the West, to support this kind of, this kind of narrative? But this is something that Hamas and the Palestinians have perfected, over, thousands of years. And that is, they know how to position themselves as victims. And that is their default position. They will continue to attack, but it's hard. They're hard pressed right now because, again, the information age, we have video of the horrific damage that they have perpetrated on Israelis, right?
Right. But the interesting, see, and this is what's happened, is that over the past few decades, the Palestinian leadership has essentially recruited a bunch of young activists, sent them over to the West. A lot of the times they go to colleges and universities and they will promote a terrible anti-Israel narrative. And the thing is that the leftists on college campuses will basically legitimize any act of violence against Israel as if it is some sort of representation of liberation, as if it's an expression of liberation. And the problem is that the same narrative was broadcast into churches that generally, instead of taking the Sermon on the Mount as some sort of personal, requirement, they tried to turn it into a political agenda. And they fell prey to, the temptation of political power and thought that Christianity was a utopian faith that could promote, create a utopia in the world, and they aligned themselves with people who essentially wanted to destroy Israel. Yeah. And the thing is that one of the things that I think we have to be careful about is now I think people are recognizing that Hamas needs to be destroyed, and that people who are knowledgeable about these things. And there's going to be a very strong campaign to stop that and to basically portray the Hamas as essentially an expression of Palestinian victimhood.
Exactly.
And that is really the worrisome thing. And you've probably read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis.
Absolutely.
Probably read it many more times than I have. But I think that we could probably rewrite that and just, do like a second or third sequel to that based on the anti-Israel propaganda that we've seen in the U.S. so far. And what they do is they problematize Israeli self-defense, give license to Palestinian violence, and that has real overall strategic impact on the ability of the American people to think clearly about what's going on. And so that's the frightening thing.
Well, we spoke with General Mir Avivi, former IDF general, and we spoke with him on Monday, Dexter, and he made us aware that because of the oppressive government of Hamas there in the Gaza, many of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have left the Gaza. They escaped through their southern border and they've gone to Egypt. So, some of this needs to be explained in such a way to where it is factual. We got to get it out of the realm of the emotional and understand that, though they want to, bring back the Palestinians into play here, it promotes a narrative. But then you've got to understand what the Palestinians as a group, because of Yasser Arafat and the PLO, what they've resisted. Time and again, they've been given opportunity to have land. They've refused it. And their mantra remains the same. And that is they don't want Israel to exist anymore. Well, how do you negotiate with another party who wants your demise? I mean, what are you negotiating for? The funeral arrangements?
Well, you see, now that's the interesting thing is that what has happened is that, progressives in the West and their allies in liberal Protestant churches have essentially promoted a notion that peace can be pursued with people who have genocidal hostility towards the Israelis and towards the Jewish people. And the thing that is very frightening is that Khaled Mashal just recently called for essentially a jihad against the West on tomorrow, on Friday the 13th. And this is a terribly frightening thing. And one of the things that I'm worried about is that we have Islamist institutions here in the United States, some of whom have received funding from various government institutions, either on a local, state, or federal level, who have issued statements that have defended Hamas. And so what we have is institutions, nonprofit institutions here in the U.S. taking full advantage of the rights accorded to them under the Constitution to advocate for violent anti-Semites, jihadists, and what they and when you confront them on it, they say, well, this is just justice. And the problem is that there are some people in the progressive community and the people who've embraced liberation theology who are willing to go along with it, despite the fact that this has all the elements of a jihad.
No question.
What it is.
Well, the other thing that you have to remember, let's start from spot one, Dexter. The land belongs to God. Okay, full stop.
Okay.
Right. So if you have a problem with the land that God has dedicated and sanctified for, his people, the children of Israel, then take it up with God. And time and again, what has happened, this is why, the evidence is so empirical, Dexter, that every time, even when the United States, and we were reporting and reminding our audience of this the other day, is that every time the United States gets involved and wants to think it's a real estate agent on God's behalf and tries to pursue a two-state solution, I don't know if you've monitored this or not, but within 48 hours, time and again, when the United States interferes with God's foreign policy and his land, incredibly, America is hit with a natural disaster. To the tune. When you go back to George H.W. Bush and going forward, and time and again, whenever they've pushed a two-state solution, America gets hit with a natural disaster. I think it's totaling now close to $1 trillion in destruction and damage that has been done on the United States. You'd think by now the policymakers and the people in America would wake up to realize this is God's land. Okay, so take your opinion and your idea out of here, because it is God's will that will be done ultimately. And that seems to be the case time and again, and especially since, starting from 1948, when Israel became a nation again.
Right.
When I tell people, Dexter, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I've been saying, for a number of decades here, is that when that happened, in terms of God's prophetic clock, the hour hand of God's prophetic clock was set. And what's been passing since then are minutes and seconds toward the final chapter of the book of Revelations.
The way I think about it is that the Jewish people have embraced and pursued throughout their history a transcendent purpose, to essentially be a people of God and to basically represent God's promises and the impact that God, and I'm speaking for myself now, okay? And I am a Roman Catholic. I just, and what that means is and other people in other community groups, what Hamas has done is exemplified another transcendent purpose,
right?
Which is to destroy the Jewish people.
Exactly.
Okay. And the thing is that and I'm going to make an argument to my non-religious friends to say, look, you don't have to accept the transcendent purpose that the Jewish people have embraced, that their belief and an insistence on living in the land that was given to them in the Old Testament. Okay. But the thing is that doesn't mean that you have to work assiduously to deprive them of that to be a blessing on this planet. And the problem that I think we see is that people have decided that the one blessing that they can provide to the world is to somehow stymie the Jewish people in their fight for survival. And I honestly do not know where that impulse comes from. It could very well be a certain amount of envy and hostility over the toughness and the transcendence that the Jewish people have manifested over the years. But what I have seen over the course of my life, and I'm speaking personally, is that the people who assail Israel, they essentially suffer terribly. Okay, and the people who stand with Israel,
well, it's biblical, Dexter. It says right there in Genesis, look at, I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. That's not.
The thing is, even if you don't believe in God, you see that process play itself out. The people who blame the Jews for their suffering end up basically squandering any opportunities they have to advance themselves in a rational level. That's what the Palestinian leadership has done. Growing numbers of Arabs and Muslims of the Middle East are starting to say, you know what? We're done with this anti-Israel stuff. The UAE signed on to the Abraham Accords. And what did they do after that? They asked Israel to help them build a satellite so that, a spacecraft to actually go to Mars. Okay. So all of a sudden they started to build for a future for themselves that didn't have anything to do with Jew hatred. But the Palestinians, and in particular Hamas, they are not interested in that. They have failed to wean themselves off of this hostility towards the Jewish people. And the problem is that we have institutions here in the United States that are aligning themselves with the progressive left, Islamist organizations who are essentially trying to promote another narrative in which basically Israel is the fly in the ointment of humanity, and that Jewish sovereignty is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone in the Middle East. And the argument I make is maybe 100,000 people have died as a result of the Arab-Israeli conflict since it began in 1948. 12 to 14 million people have died in the region overall, and what between various Muslim countries and various Muslim groups and Arab countries in the region since then. Why is it that we continually focus on this conflict? And a lot of it has to do, I think, with this. I don't like talking about this demonic impulse, but that's what it is. And I think we have to physically destroy Hamas to demonstrate that this agenda is done. It's time to put it away. And by that, I mean that Hamas needs to be defeated militarily. Its leaders either need to be killed in battle, prosecuted for the war crimes that they have perpetrated against civilians in Israel, and the crimes against humanity. I mean, we're seeing charred bodies of infants. Okay.
And decapitated infants as well.
And there was a big argument. Oh no, they weren't decapitated. Well, I honestly, when you start to burn the corpses of your dead enemies, I'm not really interested in arguing with people about whether or not those corpses were decapitated afterward. I'm not. It's just not. I'm done. And I think that this is really the thing. After the Sabra and Shatila massacre, it took place in the 1980s. The Israelis, who understood that their leaders may have had some involvement with that or some complicity, they came out at the day of the 400,000 and they protested against their leaders and said, this is wrong. We shouldn't have anything to do with it. Where are those protests in the Arab world? Where are they? Instead of seeing those protests, what we see, particularly here in the United States, is organizations that are defending Hamas. Okay. And some of these organizations are getting funding from the United States government or state and local governments.
Right. Well, Dexter, you mentioned being Roman Catholic. I as well, born and raised. And I was grieved to hear of the Pope's latest message. And he sided with the liberal left. And it was very disappointing that the Pope, of the Catholic Church, would make such a statement. I'm praying for him. I'm praying that
I am. I pray for the church as well. And I think one of the interesting things is that there are a growing number of intellectuals within the church that are starting to respectfully challenge some of the things that Pope Francis is saying. And so that'll be interesting for people to watch.
Well, Dexter, as we wrap things up with you, I want to give you an opportunity to summarize. I'm so grateful that you've come on the show to give this perspective and offer some sobriety here, because this is needed. And what will happen? I mean, the other thing that needs to be considered in the equation here, and people forget how much money Israel had poured in and gave to Hamas in hopes that they would change their evil ways. I mean, we're talking millions upon millions of dollars here.
Right. And I think, and now, right now, I think the first message or the recap is that Hamas needs to be defeated. It needs to be destroyed. Its leaders need to, be imprisoned and charged with, crimes against humanity. And I think that the American people need to start taking very close look at Islamist institutions in the United States that support and side with Hamas.
Exactly.
Because we're seeing, just one last thing is that we are starting to see the same elements of demonization. We've seen it, since 2014 being deployed against the West. The same techniques used to delegitimize Israel are now being used against Western democracies. And it's a coalition of institutions, Islamist institutions, and far left, so-called progressive institutions, particularly on college campuses.
And I might add to that, Dexter, elected officials in Congress.
Yes, absolutely.
Dexter Van Zile has been our guest. He's the managing editor of the Middle East Forum publication, focus on Western Islamism. Dexter, thanks again for coming on.
All right,
Up next, thank you, sir. Up next, we have Dr. Susan Michaels, who for more than 35 years has pioneered the development of the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem in the United States and around the world. Dr. Michaels, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be with you today.
Well, your perspective is so needed here. Help us put this, all that we have been bombarded with that has us all praying for the peace of Jerusalem, has us all grieving, for Israel and the Middle East, in hopes that this does not, it does not degrade into a regional conflict.
Yes, well, that's our prayer, and we are mobilizing prayer all around the world for Israel right now. Bill, our headquarters is there in Jerusalem. We've been there since our founding in 1980. And over the last several years, we have been very, very involved in that area of the country, which is called the Gaza envelope. We know all the security officials, all the community leaders. We placed almost 200 bomb shelters in those communities with Christian funding. Yes. And as just a show of practical assistance. And 2 days before the incursion, we took 600 Christians down there to hold a solidarity rally. And we went to the community of Berry and we began planting trees in order to help build a security there of trees and another line of defense for them. Right. And within 48 hours, that's exactly where that first incursion took place. Exactly. And they came into the community of Berry and just massacred people. And so this has all affected our organization and our staff really very, very much in the heart. And we are busy at work helping to evacuate people, feed them, house them, clothe them. We're putting out calls. We need equipment for the first responders and for the emergency workers. And so the whole nation of Israel right now is in shock and in mourning. And some of them are going from funeral to funeral. A friend of mine listed the funerals that he had attended, all people he was connected to in some way through his family. And it's just heartbreaking. So we have to cover the people of Israel in much prayer. We need to help them with as much practical assistance as possible. And so we're there on the ground to do that.
Well, Secretary Anthony Blinken today reminded everybody that, for us here in America, 9/11 still weighs heavy in our hearts. And to put it in perspective, he said, based on the population and the size of Israel, we're talking 10 times the effect.
That's right.
9/11. I mean, to think about that. And as you say here, you have friends, going from one funeral to the next, and then still so many other families in expectation of their loved one that is missing. They don't know for sure if they've been captured. Some cases they do. So there's a lot of not knowing that's adding to the stress of these families.
Yes. And, if you translate those numbers to American percentages, it's over 30,000 Americans killed in a 72-hour period. That's what they're going through there. And these were not soldiers. I mean, there were a few soldiers, but most of them were women and children and elderly and innocent civilians. Yeah. And so the magnitude of this is just, it's unimaginable.
Well, and what they did, how they attacked the young people there enjoying the festival. I mean, this was the final day of celebration of the joy of the Torah, right? And you had 260 young people that were gunned down, others that were captured, and women that were raped. You see the pictures there. I mean, Susan, it's beyond heartbreaking. You don't have enough adjectives to express the grief and disgust of something this horrific that has been perpetrated upon a fellow human being.
Yeah, I mean, this was not a military operation. This was a murder spree of kill every Jew we can find.
Yeah.
And it's vile. And to think that we have people out in the streets in America rallying on behalf of the Palestinians and Hamas at this time,
Mhm.
what are they thinking? How can they come out in support of a group that carried out such a barbaric, gruesome attack? It's
Mhm.
beyond me.
Well, the narrative, Dr. Michaels, that they've been indoctrinated with is that, Israel they're encroaching on their land. They have partitioned their country. They've deprived them of resources. And as I'd mentioned earlier, Israel has been, providing money to Hamas, to the government. But typical of totalitarian governments, the money went to the leadership. It never went down to the people. Even Palestinians were so oppressed and fed up with it that, hundreds of thousands have left the Gaza and escaped to Egypt. That's how bad it is. So yes, there needs to be a balanced perspective that there are, even when I went to Israel, there were Arabs coming into Israel, working, contributing, getting along, not a problem. But then all of a sudden you started having the intifadas break out. And then it put everybody on guard again. And it was very disappointing, for those Arabs who came in and participated in the culture of Israel. And they even said they felt more safe in areas controlled by Israel as opposed to the areas that were controlled by their Arab leaders and Palestinians.
Sure, absolutely. And there's just so many, that's just a perfect example of so much of the facts and the truth that don't make it out into the media. And right now we're being bombarded by groups the Palestinians are organizing in social media, and they are going to be bombarding everyone with these anti-Israel messaging. And now is the time for Israel's supporters to begin to speak up and take a stand, because our silence is going to just let them run all over. And before you know it, our governments will start being influenced by a totally false narrative if we don't stop it.
Well, and as you say, when Israel, they're already at the border and they're ready for a ground offensive, and it's going to be ugly. It's not going to be a pretty thing, because you're talking urban warfare. And for anybody who's been in the military, they know exactly what that involves. That's a hand-to-hand. It's a very dangerous situation. It is going to be ugly. And the West is going to have a hard time dealing with it. And this is what's happened before, is America will start out in support of these egregious actions of people like Hamas, and then they get weak. And I pray that our government and those who are in the position to make decisions on behalf of the American people, that they stand strong with Israel, stand strong with a commitment, as you said earlier. Hamas has got to, and I know that sounds harsh when you're talking about what we're talking about are evil people here. We're not talking about Arabs. We're not talking about Palestinians. We're talking about evil people who decided to go in and rape, pillage, and kill children, lop off their heads, kill the elderly, kill Holocaust victims who survived the Holocaust but did not survive this. This is such evil that is, yes, for the everyday citizen, it's incomprehensible. But the fact of the matter is that is exactly what they have done. And you need to decide if this is something you can live with, right?
Right, Bill. And, we work primarily with churches and the Christian community here in the United States. And I'm telling you, they're going to have to get tougher skin.
Yes.
And they're going to have to realize that as much as we hate war, we all hate it. We hate killing. We hate destruction. We hate what is about to happen. But we're just going to have to realize it has to happen in order to eradicate this evil
Mhm.
in Gaza, which is called Hamas, and they happen to be the government in
Exactly.
Gaza.
Mhm.
So we're going to have to just get prepared and bear with it and stand with Israel.
Well, I would remind the pastors across the country to revisit Ecclesiastes 3, when God very clearly speaks out that there is a time for peace and a time for war.
Mhm.
And you need to know the difference, because if you miss those appointed times, these are appointed times that happened. I mean, when you think about, here we are 50 years to the date of the Yom Kippur War. Do you think that this has happened by just coincidence? You don't believe that the hand of God was manifest on this? I don't know how you deny that, Susan.
Yes, well, it's very spiritual in its roots. This is an evil spirit that in the Bible it was called Amalek, and it was going to reappear every generation and fight the people of God. And we as Christians are armed to pray and to put on the weapons of our spiritual warfare, and that's why prayer is so important at this time. That
Absolutely.
we can, while Israel deals with this militarily, we need to deal with it with the power of prayer.
Right. We need to come in alignment with what God is doing here. I
Hmm.
mean, God is handling this, right? And so we need to decide who you're going to serve. Are you going to serve God, or are you going to serve the spiritual powers of this world? I think, to me, that's quite clear, Susan. I don't know about you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it's a fight between good and evil. And unfortunately, we live in a time where the world tries to call good what is evil, and it tries to call evil what is good. And so we are up against a constant fight of words, of educating people to understand what really is the good and what is the evil in this situation.
And traditionally, who have been the holders of that which is good, those that understand that which is good? It's been the church. This is why the church, and God bless you, for your efforts to work with churches, across the country here in the United States, because we know liberation philosophy and theology, replacement theology. There's a lot of antithetical forces against the truth of God. And I get that. And we may have to be just like the apostles that Jesus sent out and said, look, if they'll receive the message, give it to them, stay with them, make the most of the opportunity. My interpretation. Okay. And conversely, if they're not ready for the message, then you move on. You just shake off the dust of your feet. And this may be the case with some churches, that they're so indoctrinated and so far away from the truth of God that they can't understand. Yeah, but I believe that God has maintained a remnant that can come together in a definitive manner to make the difference for a time like this, Susan.
Yeah, so much of our work is education, because you have to teach history, you have to teach what the Bible says, and there's so much to understanding this. But we are calling for all those remnant churches, for all those churches that get it, to
Yes.
take a special offering this weekend and designate it for the relief work there in Israel. We're asking them to join us in prayer. The church has got to stand up. Those that get it and understand must take a stand at this time.
Well, Dr. Susan Michaels, as we wrap things up with you, again, I'm so grateful. It's a privilege to have you on the show. Where can people go and find out more information about the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem?
Yes, our website is icejusa.org. As soon as they go to that homepage, they'll see the Israel in Crises Fund. They can click on it, make a donation to our relief work. My blog is there. I've got over 300 articles on all these different subjects, biblically as well as politically, about Israel. We invite them to take advantage of our resources and learn and arm themselves so that they can make a response in this day.
Well, Dr. Susan Michaels, again, thank you so much for being with us. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Bill.
Coming up next, our next guest includes Gregg Roman, who previously served as the political advisor to the deputy foreign minister of Israel and worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Gregg Roman, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
He is not in the green room yet.
Okay, we're still waiting for him. Okay, we expected him to be here about this time. So, Gregg is instrumental here to this conversation because of his military background and understanding of militarily what Israel is facing here right now and the dangers that are lurking ahead as they are assembling at the border there in the Gaza. And we'll see what we can do. I'll tell you, if I'm speaking with Rebel here right now. Rebel's our producer, most excellent producer who keeps us out of trouble here. And it seems like if Gregg's running into problem, Dexter says that he's available to pinch hit. So, if we want, let's go ahead and bring Dexter Van Zile back. Dexter, thank you for pinch hitting. I guess Gregg has been delayed a lot, so you get to put on your military hard hat, and let's talk about what's next for Israel and the IDF as they are assembling there at the border, getting ready for a ground incursion.
Okay. What I have heard at this point right now is that Israel has about 360,000 ground troops on the separation area between it and the Gaza Strip. And the problem is that if they go into Israel to do a ground incursion, there's going to be a tremendous amount of difficulty associated with that because, first of all, it's a very built-up environment and they're going to be targeted with snipers. And it's going to be a very, very brutal fight. And another thing is that there's well over 100 hostages somewhere held in the Gaza Strip by Hamas. And that's one of the things that I think is very horrifying for the Israelis is that when they have hostages, this is one of the things that they work very hard to basically.
Well, of course, and they're threatening, Dexter, to kill a hostage for every unannounced bombing that's taken place. And I was looking at the daylight pictures there in the Gaza, and boy, talk about a war zone. I mean, they have already leveled a lot of buildings there.
Right. And one of the interesting things is that if you go onto Twitter, one of the things that you will see is that there is footage of actually people leaving the buildings after they've gotten the warning from the IDF saying that your building is going to be targeted soon. And this is one of the things that they have done throughout their wars with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I think the interesting thing at this point is that I think that the mow the lawn or mow the grass strategy is done. And I think that people know effectively at this point that strategy is not going to work. And now that Gregg is on, or if Gregg can be brought on.
Yeah, I see Gregg popping on now. Dexter, thank you so much
you're very welcome
for backstopping the situation. But hey, this is technology, right, Gregg? But we can fight through it.
100%, just like Israel can fight through its inevitable goal to now destroy the Hamas terror organization, which is preparing to do with an invasion of 4 divisions on all 2 sides of the Gaza Strip that Israel controls, along with naval forces. And hopefully, you want to talk about a backstop, the Egyptians cooperating with the humanitarian corridor to allow Palestinian refugees to exit through the Strip's south, if it comes to that kind of situation, at least temporarily.
Right. Well, Gregg, we heard from General Amir Avivi on Monday that already hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have recently moved out of the Gaza because of the oppressive Hamas government. So, again, we need to understand what is the universe of the Gaza. Hamas, like any other area that's controlled by an oppressive group, is a small minority, a very strong and powerful minority that has controlled the Gaza. So you've got a lot of people who are just, kind of like the Germans in World War II. They weren't Nazis. They were just trying to keep their head down and survive, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that that's 100% correct. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, considering the fact that in poll after poll, with Palestinians being asked who they would prefer to be the political party that represents their interests, both internally and also vis-a-vis Israel, Hamas always comes out on top. So when you look at...
Is that a compelled answer, though, Greg?
No, I don't think so. I think that they have options.
Yeah.
The Palestinians, if you look at the locus of their polities from the West Bank point of view and also from the Gaza point of view, between 2006 and 2007, it was really a crapshoot. Who was going to rule the Gaza Strip. This is the time period for the 2 years before June of 2007 when Hamas took power from the Palestinian Authority, which has its headquarters in Ramallah, sitting in the West Bank to the east of the Strip and a little bit to the north. But if you look at that development from 2006 through October 7th, this past Saturday, there has been a gradual generational evolution of Palestinian political opinion and also of public opinion to one in which Hamas has been able to completely indoctrinate and inculcate Palestinians living in the Strip, or at least a majority of Palestinians living in the Strip, thinking that Hamas is the only leadership that they can trust. However, there is also a significant minority of Palestinian political opinion of those who just want to wake up in the morning, go to work. They have conservative values as it relates in terms of a religious and maybe their moral fabric, but they would like nothing better not to live under Hamas and not to live under the Palestinian Authority and to live their lives like any other Arab would in any other semi-democratic or full democratic life. If you look at the model for how Arab Muslims and Arab Christians can live in the Middle East, you only have to look 1 meter over the border in Israel. Full voting rights, full participation in the legal systems, full religious autonomy. They don't have that. And Hamas must be felled before there can be an exploration of what happens with the rest of the Palestinians in Gaza.
Well, Greg, speaking of the Palestinians, I mean, going back to Arafat, he made it well known. I mean, it was doctrinal that you didn't negotiate. Anything less than 100% for the Palestinians was unacceptable, that it was all about, the erasure of Israel, full stop. So what are you negotiating? You're just negotiating a funeral, for Israel? I mean, it's untenable. And this is why this two-state solution would never work. And I think that Donald Trump was wise to go around, ignore the Palestinians and go directly and talk with, 4 of the Arab nations. And they were close to signing that Abrahamic peace deal, the Abraham Accords.
It's like Clausewitz said, at least in the Palestinian context, instead of war being the continuation of politics by other means, negotiations in Arafat's case was the continuation of war by other means. So if you really want to look at it, in 93, Israel had an opportunity prior to Oslo with the Madrid Peace Conference that George Bush, the first president, George Bush, hosted with James Baker to perhaps negotiate a peace which would have been with Palestinians who emanated from the West Bank and Gaza. But then when Clinton came in, he decided to go with this 30-year peace processing between 93 and 2023, which led to something like 80 different rounds of negotiations with all different kinds of names that are all different kind of peace czars and peaceniks and White House signing ceremonies that put Israel into the position where it got to this past Saturday. But it wasn't just the Israelis who participated in it. The PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, did as well. Hamas has always been clear, though, about its position, which is to destroy Israel and the Jewish people living in it. And the fact that American administrations may have labeled them as a foreign terror organization, but at the same time allowed U.S. Agency for International Development money to go into Gaza when they knew that Hamas would touch it, to give UNRWA, a UN agency who works hand in hand with Hamas openly, $700 million under this administration alone after President Trump froze that funding, means that they thought they could accept a deconfliction scenario without recognizing the hateful, genocidal, ethnic cleansing-based ideology that Hamas has always purported. And they were duped as much as the Israelis were, thinking that Hamas had an interest in governing rather than killing Jews.
Well, I think after all is said and done, I think that Israel can look in the mirror and say, hey, we did the best we could. I think, for all these years and the money that they invested, they themselves, millions of dollars invested into the Gaza in supporting, the Hamas government. But look what they got in return. You got a return of evil for good. And the Bible's real clear that that's not good.
No, and I think that there will be a time to reconcile open accounts on the ways in which the Israeli Ministry of Defense, the defense forces, and the government handled, not just under the Netanyahu government, but since 2005, when Ariel Sharon decided to unilaterally pull the IDF out. There's something like 8 or 9 different Israeli governments that had a hand in getting to the situation where it came to on Saturday across 4 or 5 different premierships. So just as much as Hamas was preparing for this invasion, for this pogrom, for this mini Holocaust, which took place on Saturday, there will have to be a reconciliation of sorts on the Israeli side. But the first Israeli priority, first and foremost, is to destroy the Hamas terror organization, annihilate any individual who is associated with the organization, not just sitting in Gaza. We're talking about Doha and Qatar, where the attack was planned and approved.
Exactly.
We're talking about their interest office in Tehran and Iran. We're talking about Istanbul, Turkey. 2 of those countries, one Qatar, a non-NATO major ally, and the second Turkey, a NATO ally of the United States, openly flaunt their relationship with Hamas, fund them to the tune of billions of dollars a year divided between the 3 countries that I mentioned before. And 24 Americans that we know of right now were killed by this organization. It's more than the American sailors that were killed in the USS Cole attack. And our response to that was Tomahawk missiles on Osama bin Laden's bases in Afghanistan. I hope that the U.S. is preparing a similar response with Hamas.
Well, and Iran's clear involvement with this. There's no way. I mean, the experts will tell you there is no way that Hamas could have executed a land, air, and sea event like this, attack like this, without the backing of Iran.
Well, we know about the backing of Iran. If you go to our website, meforum.org, you'll see an article from the summer of 2022 written by Jonathan Schanzer called Hamas and Tehran, the Backdrop. What's the relationship between Hamas's starting in 1988 all the way through 2022? And then you'll also see another article there called the Hamas-Israel Backgrounder, which gives you 2 perspectives. What's the Iran-Hamas relationship and what's the Israel-Hamas relationship? And how did we get to the point where we were a year ago?
Right.
Just this last July, we held a hearing in the Knesset, Israel's parliament, with 8 members of Knesset, ministers, members of Israeli civil society, the military, where we called for the disarmament of Hamas, where we thought maybe they could maintain a police force. 4 months ago, we called for this in terms of Israel victory over that. We were wrong. We should have been calling for the elimination of the organization because we didn't know. And I don't think many Israelis really thought that Hamas had the auger to go this far, but they did. And now it has to be dealt with.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, even to the point that they had planning models right there, and they saw them, but they really didn't take them as a warning that it should have been. Greg, we've got about 2.5 minutes left, and I wanted to give you an idea to summarize. Also, let's talk about the potential. Hezbollah has been, I think, biting at the bit to get involved here and add another front to this war. What do you think?
I think that Hezbollah is in a different situation politically because they have to contend with Sunni, Maronite, and Druze minority groups all in the same country in Lebanon. If they do get involved, the way that Iran sees Hezbollah is as the strategic deterrent against an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran would like to activate Hezbollah in the instance that the Israelis attack Iran's nuclear program. However, the exchange of anti-tank guided missile fire, the exchange of drones, limited rocket attacks coming from Lebanon, all are a symbol of might portend to be the opening of a front from the north. And I think that Hezbollah would be better off not getting involved. The thing that's different about this versus 2006, the last time Israel and Hezbollah went to war against one another, is there's 2 U.S. battle groups, carrier battle groups sitting off the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean, which I think, and I've never been one to advocate for American intervention in Israel's wars, but the fact that so many Americans were killed in the Gaza Strip the fact that the U.S. now has a strategic interest in reestablishing deterrence and maybe getting a fait accompli over one of the listed foreign terror organizations, very much like the Tamil Tigers were taken out a generation ago. This is the time to tackle not just Hamas, but if it comes to it, Hezbollah, Shia militias in Syria, Iraq, and in Yemen, and maybe the grand prize, if you will, which is Iran and its nuclear program. But I don't want to go too far. I don't want to go too far.
I clearly it's inevitable. And in order to reach the bunkers where the nuclear operation is, it would require, and we've known this for a long time, it would require the bunker busting bombs of the U.S. to aid in Israel's efforts to eradicate that, right?
Correct. And there's other technologies that are not spoken about that can do the same thing from the inside. So,
well, Gregg, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. Remind people where they can go for more information.
The two places you can follow us are at meforum.org, meforum.org, or on Twitter at meforum, or should I say X, at meforum.
Well, Gregg, again, we thank you so much for coming on the show and bringing us up to date on all things Israel. Look forward to staying in touch and continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
Take care. God bless. Gregg Roman, who previously served as the political advisor to the deputy foreign minister of Israel and worked for the Israeli defense. Our gratitude to our three guests for coming on today to give us an update on what is going on there at the Gaza in Israel. Our thanks to Gregg Roman, Dr. Susan Michaels, and Dexter Van Zile. For more information and to be a part of this mighty movement to return to God and save our country, go to BillMartinezShow.com. May God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you peace. Go and have a great day. Thank you so much for being with us.